So once again, for those just joining us, my name is Dustin Thompson. I'm the Volunteer and Community Outreach Coordinator for the Delaware Sierra Club. With me today, I have the wonderful, marvelous Peggy Schultz from the League of Women Voters. We have James Wilson from Bike Delaware, and we have Jonathan Kirch, who is a strong advocate for public health and environmental policy here in the first state. So if we could do some introductions, just so everybody knows a little bit of background about yourselves, that would be great. So why don't we start with Peggy?
I'm with the League of Women Voters, and I'm portfolio chair for climate change and energy, as well as land use and transportation.
James?
I'm James Wilson. I'm the executive director of Bike Delaware. And I'll just say one thing about Bike Delaware. We are a little bit unusual among active transportation organizations in that we are interested in and have a land use agenda.
And John?
Hey, for almost 14 years, I was the government relations director for the American Heart Association in the state of Delaware and the city of Philadelphia. But since the summer, I've been a dad and recovering from some difficult health issues myself personally. So that's my story.
Wonderful. All right, well, with all of these issues, I think it's always a little important to kind of define some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to start out just with, if we could do like super brief concept, 10,000 foot definition of complete communities. I think that would be helpful. And then to kind of highlight what sprawl is, which we're going to be talking about a lot today as well. So I'm going to start with the complete communities with James, and then we're going to go to sprawl with Peggy. So why don't we start with James?
I think there are different, if you ask that question to different people, you might get, slightly different angles of perception on what a complete community is. But I will give my view on what on sort of the essential characteristic of a complete community certainly from Bike Delaware's point of view. A complete community is a place where if you don't want to, or you can't afford to, you don't have to own a vehicle because there are robust alternatives to getting where you need to go without owning a car. And you can talk about a million other things, and all those other things are legitimate, and there are things that have to, happen in order for that. But for me, that is the essential component of a complete community. Multimodal transportation that means it's optional whether you have to own a car.
Great, thanks. And Peggy, maybe you could talk for a minute about what sprawl is and maybe a few reasons why it's so bad for the environment.
Oh, right. Could you show that slide, Dustin? Actually, the Sierra Club issued a report in 2000 on sprawl in the Delaware Sierra Club, and they defined it as low density, automobile dependent development that occurs at the fringes of the urban landscape. And I would also add that it's usually zoned single family. And this picture here illustrates the concept of sprawl pretty well, except that you can't see the driving distances that you need to get to your stores and other places that you want to hang out. So, the obvious disadvantage of sprawl is that you have, it greatly increases the number of vehicle miles traveled. And so then you have a lot more carbon dioxide emissions. And if we could show slide 2, Dustin. And here's Philadelphia, and you see there's a whole lot of energy use per acre in Philadelphia itself. It's all red, and it looks pretty ominous and pretty awful. So that's emissions per acre. Now go to the next slide. And you see Philadelphia looking very, very green. And that's energy use per person. And so that changes considerably. And we see that Philadelphia, where all the concentration of residential development is, you see it's very green per person. And then the people who live in the outlying areas are the guys who have to drive a long ways, and so they're necessarily the ones that are driving up the emissions levels. And if you could look at the next slide, and this is just suggesting that we've got a lot of carbon emissions from the exhaust pipes at 4.6 megatons of CO2 per year. So that's a lot. And then given that our population is growing, and we hear that that the population of the United States is expected to grow 30 million per decade until 2050. And so you've got even more carbon dioxide because everybody's got a car. So it drives up the amount of carbon dioxide. And another issue with the environment and sprawl is that a bunch of smaller buildings are much more costly to heat than a few larger ones that are in a concentrated area. So that drives up the emissions as well. And furthermore, excuse me, sprawl sprawl causes a lot of destruction of green fields or land that has never been built upon. It may be farmed upon, but not built upon. So, and developers are putting up buildings on that right and left, as we know. And we also, with sprawl, we get the destruction of the wildlife habitats and then the wildlife corridors. And also we have issues with the removal of open space, open lands that will serve as flood mitigators. And there's no more open space to absorb all the water that comes down. So that's kind of it as far as what I see as the environmental issues related to sprawl.
Great, I appreciate that. So John, I know I have a long history in the public health world. So maybe you could talk a little bit from a public health perspective, kind of some of the issues that we deal with around sprawl.
Yeah. So, let me say a couple things to set the scene of public health advocacy in America really quickly. Probably for the beginning of the last century, you could see enormous improvements in human health and population health based on clean running drinking water being available to homes and people, and that increased life expectancy all over the globe tremendously. And then in the latter half or so of the 20th century, a great deal of public health advocacy in the prevention area to improve human health then started to focus on different concerns around what some people call lifestyle factors, but I'm just going to point out a few. Diet and smoking, which folks have heard that if you don't smoke and you don't eat a steak and potato every night of the week, you'll take better care of your health. So, and that was where a lot of prevention advocacy fell for 50 years. But as we really achieved incredible successes in reducing smoking, and as there was incredible improvements made in the treatment of different cardiovascular health issues through different drugs that now are incredibly inexpensive, and there's generics for them and everything. So in recent years, smoking rates are way down. We've got a big problem in the vaping issue and tobacco, but if you look at life expectancy in this country in the past 5 years, it hasn't been improving. And that is the first time that was true for more than 100 years. And it caused a lot of epidemiologists and a lot of people to shake their head and think, well, what's going on here? Well, one thing that we can attribute a lot of human health problems to is actually small particulate pollution attributable to largely both vehicles and the electrical grid. And both are, the use of both is really accelerated and exacerbated tremendously through the development pattern of our homes and commercial businesses, industrial, retail, and the like. So we know that vehicles and particularly vehicles are spewing a lot of really harmful chemicals into the air, and people are living right alongside these corridors and high-speed roadways, and you can see it in their life expectancy. And so we realized that we had to start paying attention to that and doing some advocacy around that. So there's a lot of ways that public health advocacy and the prevention landscape is changing, but one of them is really developing a laser focus on pollution, particulate pollution, and greenhouse gas emission as well.
Great. So, I mean, given the fact that we're seeing a lot of environmental disruption and a lot of health issues related to, as John was saying, vehicle emissions, and also I'd throw in there kind of the sedentary lifestyle that comes with sprawl, where you don't have a lot of resources or amenities around you. Why has sprawl been so attractive to the market and other drivers? What issues have been created that kind of have sent us down this road? James, I'm going to go to you first.
So I think you got to point at the cost of housing as a or the key driver. So probably folks on this call have heard of the drive till you qualify, that phrase. So we have made it extremely difficult. We've made it extremely easy for developers to go out into rural or semi-rural areas and build housing. That's where we've made it easy for them, and therefore cheaper for people to buy housing. But we've made it in our historic communities, in our already, as it were, built up areas, we make it extremely difficult to develop housing, and so it becomes more expensive, and we are driving, especially lower income people, farther and farther away and out into sprawling areas. That is, I think, the key dynamic in the U.S.
I'll say for our other speakers, feel free to throw up the finger or give a wave or what have you, or just jump in if you want as we go through here.
Yeah, I would add to what Jim's saying that a lot of existing zoning and other rules, laws, and ordinances that exist separate home communities away from, let's say, a doctor's office or an office space, and they almost, not almost, I would argue they do define the acceptable development of parcels and of structures into separated, sprawled uses and communities by code. And that's really difficult to work with.
That's a key point, because the potential advantage historically, like if you go back 100 years, why did, probably all of our, if you well, actually my family, I'm descended from farmers and coal miners, so not them, but on my wife's family, they grew up in an urban area, and you read about Jane Jacobs during the Depression. She moved to Brooklyn during the Depression, and they were just she had a roommate, and in order to afford rent and everything like that. But the thing that made it economical for her to live where she lived, even if the rent was a little higher than it would have been somewhere else, is she didn't have to own a car. She got where she needed to go without a car. So that is a potential huge economic advantage to complete communities. But as Jonathan points out, it doesn't work, right? Unless that's what it is, right? I mean, you've got a community where jobs and schools and shopping and all that stuff is relatively, mixed together, so that a lot of your everyday destinations aren't that far away from each other.
I gotta jump in here, and then I'll get to Peggy. I know, James, I always knew there was something. It's you're descended from coal miners. That the truth comes out. James is in the pocket of big coal historically. I'm just kidding. Peggy, go ahead.
So actually, it's exclusionary single-family zoning has been just a terrible blight in the United States, and it started actually as a very, very blatant attempt to have those people in another place, because if you required that only single family homes could be built, then you couldn't have multifamily housing. And of course, complete communities gets rid of that idea. So, I mean, I love this complete communities ideas on so many levels, and it of course does away with the single family zoning, but I think single family zoning is another issue that we're going to have to come to grips with in Newcastle County, because it's very exclusionary. It's kind of, we got ours, so don't you come in and mess it up. So it's not at all an equitable situation.
So James, would you say, at least in your opinion, and then we'll hear from the others, do you see complete communities and the kind of the systems that we have in place that are encouraging or at least exacerbating the issue around sprawl, are these opposing forces? Are these two parts of a similar puzzle? How do you view the relationship there?
So several years ago, the state passed the Complete Communities Law, which was intended to help and encourage and set a structure up for that kind of development to happen, or redevelopment. If you've got like an older community like Newport, say, I would say that is a having a favorable, permissive, liberal environment for complete community development is a precondition to yanking on the reins for more sprawl. I wouldn't want to oversell it though and say that it in and of itself it's enough. I think I think you probably need two parts. You need, on the one hand, liberal, permissive, rules and structures in place so that it's really easy to develop that way, so that to create and strengthen complete communities. And then, in addition to that, and this is perhaps a separate policy discussion, you need to probably make it more difficult to develop out in the middle of nowhere.
Any John or Peggy, did you want to jump in on that?
Well, James is good. That's good.
All right. So what part of the issue do you feel like, and I'm going to start with John on this, and then we'll kind of go through, I think everybody's going to have a turn on this one. What part of the issues around sprawl do you think that having more complete communities, or better, as James was saying, a more palatable environment for complete communities would resolve with regard to sprawl and lack of community resources and that sort of thing? And then what do you think, even with complete communities, would we still really need to address? So I'm going to go John first on this one.
So you mentioned the sedentary lifestyle thing, and I completely glossed that over, but I think it's incredibly important, because I think it is the other side of the coin in terms of what we're talking about with public health prevention. So, I mean, in addition to the fact that you're getting all this particulate pollution coming off of these vehicles, so many Americans are sitting. Well, things have changed. Before the pandemic, many millions of Americans sat in traffic, breathing in fumes, stressed out and annoyed with their blood pressure going up, and not moving their feet, not moving to get from work to home. And then as this development pattern has matured over time, so many people can't walk to the store to get a bite to eat, can't walk to a restaurant, can't, like I said, walk to a doctor's office, can't. And so because they feel outside of a vehicle, I feel outside of a vehicle so many times very unsafe and unwelcome, moving about the community where the vehicles are zipping around very, very quickly. You feel like, I'm not supposed to be here. This is where the cars go. This is not for me. And that's not, that's not just a bad attitude in your head. That's very real. So, so when you throw these things together, you've got what you've got, and then you also look at what's going on. And I won't go into, the agricultural system and our food production, which drives a tremendous amount of greenhouse gas emission and is very, very energy wasteful. But you've got a lot of overweight Americans with high blood pressure, and then as you started to do autopsies on people, now you're also seeing the particulate pollution that's exacerbating and accelerating these problems that are made worse by a sedentary lifestyle. Chief is atherosclerosis, which is how you wind up with a stroke or a heart attack quite frequently. So let me stop there and let Peggy chime in. But all these things are feeding off of each other and making each other worse, and it's a big problem.
Well,
Peggy, we'll go to you.
yeah, as Jonathan said, you know, you've got all these wonderful resources right at hand in a complete community that you don't have if you're living in a sprawl situation, and it's particularly helpful if you're an old person and you maybe don't feel too comfortable driving a car, or maybe your vision is not great, and then you can walk to all these places. But there is there's one possible issue that I could see coming that we need to be kind of alert to in a complete community, and that's the possibility of displacement due to gentrification. You know, I mean, nobody really minds living in a neighborhood that gets kind of spiffy and all, you know, the buildings get all renovated and they all look modern, and you get nice furniture out on the sidewalks, and that nobody objects to that. But it's a problem, it's a potential problem for renters because the rents can go up. So it doesn't seem to be an issue with homeowners, but with renters. And there are a couple things that we can do about that. We can have rent controls, actually, and that would be helpful. And Dustin, I gave you another slide that has a list of things besides rent control. Okay, and so we can offer tax credits to low-income, elderly, and disabled. And hopefully that would keep renters in those categories from having to move. We can offer developers more density in exchange for affordable housing units. And people in the business say that we want to intersperse affordable housing. We don't want to have a big building and label it affordable housing, and because that doesn't seem to be really a good way to operate. And then we want to offer financial support for renters who want to buy their homes. You know, if you've seen some of the cities, I've seen San Francisco, where my daughter and son-in-law lived for a year, and they rented an apartment, and it was, they could have bought it. It was a second floor apartment. I think it was selling for $1.5 million, a second floor condo sort of thing. So if you own that when gentrification begins, you're doing well, because of course your property will appreciate. But if you're a renter, we have to be particularly careful that we're treating people in lower incomes with grace and respect and equity.
James, I saw your hand pop up there.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the problem with Peggy, the problem with number 2 is that it presupposes that you've set up your development rules in your complete community so that, you know, developers are hamstrung and they or just forget the word developer, just people are hamstrung, you know, in terms of like building an ADU or putting another floor on a building or whatever it takes to build more housing units. You know, the only way your number 2 works, Peggy, is like if that's the situation, and then, you know, you're having to, you know, trade, you know, to get to, you know, it's a highly politicized political environment in order to get permission to build, and then you have politicians trading affordable housing things to permit developers to go. That's the wrong way to think of it. I mean, if you've got a complete community, which is awesome, people want to live there, you should let more housing be built there.
Yeah, exactly. And my assumption was that they were hamstrung, but they don't necessarily have to be, and that's a good point.
Yeah, I'm in here and say I'm a huge proponent. It's a little bit off topic, but I just could not be more strongly in favor of permitting homeowners to improve upon their properties to allow more families to live on their parcels, like turning single families into quads or however, or Jim brought up accessory dwelling units. The notion that as someone who has a home, that you have to like make all of these crazy applications and go through all this incredible headache to improve your property, to me just seems, I find it un-American.
This is Dustin, I don't know if you want to jump in here. This is one of the weirdest things about what we're talking about, right? Because I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that, people who are turning into a Delaware Sierra Club Facebook Live are like, believe climate change is happening, believe it's a really important issue, an urgent issue, should be at the top of the agenda. Like, we need to work here. And yet, for the last couple of minutes anyway, what we've mostly been talking about, like if some like conservative Reaganite Republican from the 1980s had been put in a time machine to hear people talking about, yeah, we need to make it easier for people to build and add more housing and cut regulations and rules. Like they'd think this was like a meeting of the Libertarian Party of America. It's a very, like, it's a weird thing, right? I mean, we're like passionate environmental advocates and we're saying, hey, this is actually a place where we need drastically less government in order to like meet our environmental goals. It's weird, right? It's totally bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, well, we've seen kind of the historical consequences of allowing, almost incentivizing even the building further and further out away from metropolitan areas. And part of the reason is, as John had said, where you have one or two permits maybe to get something built out in the sticks, because you don't have to worry as much about infrastructure improvements and timing of lights and all of that sort of, the traffic impacts and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
But the downside of that, right, is that you're building more and more infrastructure that leads to nothing, right, and going more and more on septic, taking up, right, more and more farmland, right? And then, but if you want to do something in a more metropolitan area, forget about it. I mean, the list of permits and applications you have to go through is 10 miles long.
So there are a whole series of issues that the environmental community cares passionately about, where there's tension with the business community. But I can't think of one specific thing, one specific policy area where there is potentially a larger opportunity for the environmental community and the conservative business community to actually work together than this, to like figure out where we want development to happen because it's good for the environment, good for our health, good for our quality of life, and like, have the environmental community and the business community, be allies with that. I
would say, yeah, it certainly, it doesn't happen often where the environment and business community come to an agreement on something. Certainly, as we've been talking about the RPS here at the state level, certainly the environmental community and the business community has oddly been at odds, given the fact that what we're proposing doesn't actually increase costs or anything. But at any rate, I think you hit a key point, though, is where it makes sense to do this kind of additional building. Because of course, not every area it's going to make sense because the resources aren't there, right? But if the resources are there, then it does make sense to have housing where the resources are, which is really what we're talking about.
I'll just say one more thing about the complete. You said right at the beginning about complete communities, and I said, these are places where the transportation options are in place, and obviously we care about cycling and walking. We're by Delaware, that's our mission. But the transit piece is absolutely key here. As Peggy and Jonathan and Dustin, I think like you can't provide high quality transit service out to the exurbs, where people are on like half-acre plots. Like that just doesn't work. So there is this key synergy between, the bad word, I'm going to say it now, density and transit. And the key to moving forward here is A, recognizing that, and B, making sure that we are, making that synergy happen. More transit and where focused growth zone density, and then that allows us to make our transit system better, and not just sprawling all over the environment. I'll just quote the CEO of the our state's transit system. He had a great quote for me that he told me a couple. I don't think I'm going to get him in trouble by quoting in public. This was a private meeting, but he said about Newcastle County, he said, if there is anything that Newcastle County could have done over the last 50 years to make my job as the CEO of the state's transit system more impossible than it already is, I cannot think what that thing would have done, because for the last 50 years, we have developed in a way consistently to make transit more and more and more impossible and low quality in Delaware.
It's so funny that that the way you've framed and qualified your usage of that word. We do hear a lot about in certain environmental circles around about infill and density, and I think for many they have almost become like a pejorative term. But I mean, to kind of frame the context of what we're talking about, how does density and infill development relate to this conversation? Maybe
So I mean, we've all been hearing those words for many years. I've been hearing the word infill. You hear, county officials often, over the last year, that's a word they use, infill. I've been thinking about those words, and I've decided, at least for myself, I've opinion about each of those words, and they're the opposite. I've decided I hate the word infill. I hate it. I want to prohibit any government official from ever using it again. And I want to reclaim the virtue of the word density, which in my view should be thought of as almost a potential synonym just for the word civilization. Like, that's what we, talking about building great places. That's what we are talking about when we're talking about density. I'd like to reclaim the word density, but I think I'm going to hop on the bandwagon that the word infill is bad, because it really does, it's like, you've got like a little piece of open space, that's left, that's the only little piece of farmland or little patch of forest, and we're like, oh, we're going to fill it in. But if you don't talk about the character of that development, it may just, as Jonathan was saying, it may just be another piece of little auto-dependent thing that doesn't really, it's filled in, but it doesn't really change the character of the area so that it becomes more walkable and bikeable and mixed use and ready for transit. So I'm going to get on board with the I hate infill, because like it doesn't talk about the character of what gets built there. But I'm going to try to argue that like we should try to reclaim density as a good word.
I think that's a great point. And then I'm going to jump. I got Peggy shot her hand up, and John, I think, wants to jump in here. But I think that's a great point, is that it matters what the density consists of, right? Because we also have resource deserts right here. And I live in Wilmington, right here in Wilmington, where there are no doctor's office, there are no food, but you got plenty of density, right? Or the food that you have is junk. No access to fresh groceries and things of that nature. So I'm going to go Peggy and then John.
Well, you know, I think we don't really have a good realistic idea of what density is in Delaware. I've heard people at public meetings argue that, oh my gosh, they're going to allow 6 dwelling units per acre. Oh, that's going to be so crowded. We can't possibly deal with that. But density to make transit viable is up in the area of 14, 15, 16 dwelling units per acre. Now, if that comes in apartments or little itty bitty lots, whatever, you've got to have density. And we can't complain about transit not coming out to our homes out in the boondocks, because it's just not reasonable. It's like having a taxi service. If we're not willing to move in a place where we can be reasonably close together, it's not viable for our transit company to service us. So we've got to get a realistic idea of what density is, and that we can't have it all. And it doesn't mean that everybody's got to live like this in a complete community. We've got choices. I mean, we should have choices, but as it is now, we don't have very many choices. If you want to live in a complete community, you're going to be kind of stuck. James lives in a lovely area. He lives in Newcastle, where you can walk every place. And I live in downtown Newark, where you can walk every place, and it's wonderful. We both have density going for us, but we got to understand what density is. It's not 5 dwelling units per acre.
I just had to acknowledge Dr. Williams in the chat, who, it's not at all tangential to what we're talking about. I think she said she's doing some PhD research on where you live being a key determinant, or almost the determinant of your health, and that's so true, and it's directly tied to what we're talking about. Oh, you're right, Dr. Williams. You're already done, though.
Peggy, I think it would be helpful or beneficial to those of us who maybe haven't been around the land use circles for as many years as the people on this call have. Probably many in our audience as well, though. Maybe you could give us a little history of where the idea for the policies that Delaware has had in the past, and then maybe we'll get to a little bit more about what we're talking about here this year around complete communities. I think it started back in 2015, right?
Yeah, and actually it's really kind of James's story, but I'll tell it if James doesn't mind. He had the idea, and he went to Senator McDowell with his idea, and in 2015, and he had Senator McDowell wasn't too excited about it, and James was in his office at the time he was promoting this issue, and he looked over at the senator's bookshelf, and he saw a volume on trains, a train from northern Delaware to southern Delaware. And then he thought, that's it. And so he suggested to Senator McDowell that you're never going to have a train from the top of Delaware to the bottom unless you have a network of transit communities. So that was a wonderful hook, I think, that you caught there, James, and then Senator McDowell liked it, and he filed the bill in June of 2015, and then, or May, was it May? Maybe it's May, and then it slumbered for a long time because there was a key senator who wasn't on board with it, and he didn't want to move forward without this person's permission. anyway, he got a new surge of energy in the next half of the session, and it was worked on, and it ultimately passed in, I think it was in June of that year, was it?
May
of that year, May of 2016. And one thing that was really unusual about it was that of course, it was a wonderful concept, and the League of Women Voters was all over it because it was such, we do studies around certain topics, and one of our studies not too many years ago was on directing growth into growth zones in order to spare carbon emissions and to keep our planet cleaner. So we loved the idea of the complete communities, but a lot of really unusual bed partners joined in, and one was the Realtors Association, wasn't it, James? And then you had the League, and you had the American Heart Association, and you had the AARP, and you had a lot of others. I've always just been I still can't believe that the realtors were one of the supporters of this bill. But anyway, it came along. There were only a few detractors, and some of those folks said that they felt that the bill was a little bit too vague. But we found that those arguments were about 180 degrees wrong. So as it turned out, and maybe James wants to.
Yeah, James, if you want to add anything to that, and then also maybe talk about some of the issues that ended up on none of these complete community zones have really been able to take off. So maybe you can add anything that Peggy covered and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. It's now been 4 years, so I'm not sure I remember everything in detail. But to the extent that there were arguments that the bill was too vague, I don't think that has been borne out, as Peggy said. The original legislation set up an architecture, a planning tool for states and local governments to work together and to say, where do you want this kind of growth? Not the normal auto-dependent growth that we've been doing for the last 50, 80 years, but where do you want to have growth that's walkable and bikeable and transit ready? Like, if you guys can decide, then the law says, okay, you can designate this area, this district. It's called a complete community enterprise district, and it turns out that the law was probably written too strictly, a little too, we didn't want it to just be anywhere, because as you said, Dustin, it matters, what's already kind of in place, what resources are in place. So we tried to capture that with the legislation, but I think it was written a little too strictly. And so there is a bill that Representative Wasinski filed, which just tweaks it a little bit, just makes it the criteria just a little bit more liberal, makes it a little bit easier for local governments to do this. And so that's what's happening in this legislative session. So
I don't know if you want to go into any kind of specific details on the tweak or not. And so again, for real quick though, before you
yeah. So the original, you want these districts to be you don't want them to be along a corridor, right? Because a key thing here, again, go back to the angle on the complete community that's so key about people not having to own a car. So in order for that to be practical, you need a lot of destinations that are relatively close together. And if you have an area that's spread out along a corridor, then destinations on average will be far apart. The best type of shape would be a circle. On average, destinations that are randomly distributed in a circular area will, any two that you choose randomly will be relatively close together. So the original law, the law that's currently in place, actually had a quantitative measure, a mathematical measure for that. And when Newcastle County actually went to sort of like see where you might be able to designate one of these things. They found that to be a little too strict. So the new law, the bill that was filed this year just takes away that quantitative measure and just says, look, it should be a compact shape and, you know, not along a linear corridor. That's really probably the key change in the bill.
Yeah, and I think that's one of kind of some of the pushback that certain individuals I know I've seen online talking about, you know, density or infill. The idea that this would happen somewhere like 202, which is you just, you know, the corridor issue, right? And certainly, I don't think anybody really wants to add more traffic or congestion onto 202. But so is there, so this bill would specifically disallow corridor building, correct?
It would, and it retains another part of the law that doesn't touch at all, that would make it difficult to do it and include the 202 corridor. It's a really important part. It doesn't make it completely impossible, but it makes it pretty hard. And that is, if you designate one of these complete communities anywhere in the state, then a mandate in state law is placed on the Delaware Department of Transportation, which says that every single street and road within the boundaries of the district, as long as it's not limited access, wouldn't apply to I-95, but any other street or road, including Concord Pike, if you were to do that, has to be designed to be 25 miles per hour or less. So if somehow the state and Newcastle County were to come to an agreement and to designate a complete community that included like a little section of Concord Pike, DelDOT would have to redesign the segment of Concord Pike in the district to be a 25 mile per hour street, which is that's a big lift. And, you know, I mean, that would be totally changing the character of Concord Pike, at least as it passes through the district.
Right, yeah, because it's really, unfortunately, being heavily relied on as a thoroughfare for a lot of people, which
I think there are a few places. I don't know whether Concord Pike makes sense, but you could imagine some places where that would work. I'll give you one example: Smyrna. Like if the you know, the political and business leadership of the town of Smyrna was like, you know, why is DuPont Highway, as it slices through Smyrna, a highway when Route 1 is 100 yards away? You know, that doesn't make any sense anymore. So this tool, this planning tool, you could kind of imagine it working in Smyrna and resulting in a radical redesign of DuPont Highway as it passes through the city of Smyrna, so that it becomes not DuPont Highway, but DuPont Street.
interesting concept. So I saw somebody's hand shoot up, as has historically been the case for technical and privacy reasons. We have to get disclosures and all that stuff because we broadcast this on Facebook and archive it on YouTube. We don't really do the audio comments from the audience during the live streams, but if you have a comment or any questions, you can drop it in the chat. And I want to give a minute for anybody that has any questions or comments to jump in on the chat so we can bring them in. We've had a few people talking on our Facebook feed as we've been going through, agreeing with your distaste for the term infill, and how the current framework is very kind of transactional versus intentional, which I think is a great way to phrase that. And then, so we have one wondering how current paratransit needs compare with other transportation options that come with density. He was referring to how bikes can be great, and walking can be great, but concerned with those that aren't able to do those options.
Peggy or Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm not understanding the question. Could you
Sure.
say that And
Yeah, I'll
Dustin?
try to rephrase. I think what the question is kind of getting at is in other places, because I know there are kind of examples of the city within the city, kind of complete community sort of modeling in other states. As Peggy was saying, we don't really have that many, if any, options like that. I think Newark maybe comes the closest, maybe historic Newcastle, it's a little bit there. But maybe in other jurisdictions, how has resources for those that are maybe mobility, challenged mobility wise, is there still a lot of access for things like paratransit or other options for people that maybe necessarily can't get around as easily on a bike or something like that?
Yeah, actually, the ADA requires that paratransit be available for anybody who lives a quarter of a mile on either side of a fixed route public transit line. So Delaware has gone way, way outside that federal requirement and provides paratransit anywhere, which actually kind of encourages sprawl, because it says that anywhere is okay to live and you can still have access to paratransit, which is very, very cheap. And I think it doesn't, well, the fare pays like about 1/7 of the cost of the ride. Anyway, of course, paratransit would certainly still be available, and particularly available, even federally obligated to be available in a complete community. So that would never change. It would still be there. And so even, if you had mobility issues such that you really could just walk to a paratransit car and that's it, then you'd be good in a complete community situation. But it's, I don't know if the paratransit situation as it is will live on forever, or if it will someday be reduced to what the federal requirements are. But it's a very costly gift to the people of Delaware.
And we have a question in the chat. It's a little bit in the weeds. Maybe James, you could speak to this on the inclusion of commercial regional zoning in a CCD.
So that is a question that I will take a shot at answering, but I would highly urge whoever asked that to direct it to Newcastle County. So the bill that's been filed to tweak the CCD was filed at the request of Newcastle County. As I understand it, the reason that that's in there is because when they went to go look at places like, for instance, Newport, to designate a CCD, they found not like giant mall-sized parcels zone complete community, but like little auto repair place, like quarter of an acre for some bizarre reason that were zoned commercial regional. So like don't quote me. I like, that's my understanding that's the way I understood the explanation. So, but to double check it, I would go back to Newcastle County and check with Newcastle County Department of Land Use that that's correct. That when they actually went, they didn't just find like some giant 10-acre parcel. They found little tiny parcel that was zoned commercial regional. So that's why they wanted to take that out of the law, because it prevented them, without having to like try to figure out how to get that rezoned. It prevented them from doing a district designation where they thought it made sense.
So another question here, and then we do actually have to wrap up. We're already over the top of the hour. Is the definition of linear corridor in the bill?
if the bill were to be passed, the new criteria for district designation would be that the shape of the district must be a compact shape and not a linear corridor.
Gotcha. But does the act define linear corridor, or is that somewhere else in the code?
It's not defined in any qualitative way. I think it's just a qualitative definition.
Gotcha. All right. Well, unfortunately, we are at the top of the hour, so we do have to wrap it up here. I appreciate everybody joining us on the Zoom, and we've had a steady stream over on Facebook as well. Feel free to reach out to our speakers. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to answer any additional questions moving forward. This will be on our Facebook. As soon as the live is ended, the live stream is ended, it'll process and it'll be up there to be shared, but we'll upload it on our website. We are taking a break next week. It's the final week of session this week for the before the JFC break. And there's a lot to kind of catch up on after that. We will be back though in the second week of February with McKay Jenkins as we discuss the new Master Naturalist class that you can take in Delaware now for its second cohort starting up here soon. And the week after that, we will be talking about carbon taxes and how they could possibly be, or not, a good solution for helping curb the climate crisis. So I hope you guys will keep tuned on our Facebook feed and join us for future live streams. I appreciate, of course, our speakers. Thank you very much for the lovely discussion today. Have a good one.
For the opportunity.
Bye, everybody.